and this might be the dumbest thing in the movie.
Oh my gosh, where were the sets? Like
Nothing but a massive jiggling jowl.
Hey guys, we're back. Another episode of The Crowded Theater, or perhaps the first episode of The Crowded Theater.
Maybe the first, or the last,
first.
or somewhere in the middle.
Or something like that. Yes, that's right. Well, welcome back, guys. Hey, we're here to talk. You know, we once had a podcast, a long time ago, and then not unlike Batman at the end of the last one of the Christopher Nolan things, he disappeared for a long time and then was called back by a bat signal in the sky. And our bat signal was this cinematic masterpiece. was Joker Fully Dumb, or whatever it is. This movie, anyway.
I'm not going to learn how to pronounce it correctly.
I'm not going to
It's not worth it.
Listen, the reason we say we're talking about how this may or may not be our first episode, we've recorded one, which I think we're going to post pretty soon, on the Terminator. It was going to be our first episode for this, and we wanted to have Cliff, and you know this, and Taylor, you know that this is true. We wanted to have a simple movie podcast where we talked about old movies, and so we were all teed up to talk about the movie that's on everybody's lips right now, A Fish Called Wanda, playing at the AFS Theater, starring John Cleese, Kevin Kline, and Jamie Lee Curtis, which we did see last week. And we were going to record an episode today all about what a great classic comedy it was. I got out my Alec Guinness box set because I was going to talk about the Ealing comedies and Kind Hearts and Coronets and all sorts of fun stuff. But then our Friday night was ruined. Cliff, go ahead.
Yes. Well, first of all, one of the positive things we would have said about A Fish Called Wanda is how well the audience reacted to it in the theater and the theatrical experience of seeing an old movie in a theater and how wonderful it was. And I'd say the polar opposite audience reaction, you could say, took place in Joker 2 last night, which is still fresh on everybody's mind. I think Taylor what was happening to the fella next to you in the
Literally,
theater?
the guy next to me fell asleep like halfway through, fully curled up in his chair, asleep. In a
way, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. I feel like reporting on Joker 2 first almost undermines the entire thesis of this podcast, which is how magical and transcendent the theater experience was. And man, there's no better way to appreciate how magical and transcendent seeing a good movie in a crowded theater could be, which we did see this week with A Fish Called Wanda, which I think had more people in the theater than when we saw Joker 2.
Fish Called Wanda was sold out.
Yeah, no better way to appreciate that than, as the song says, you don't know what you got till it's gone. And you could feel, I think, in Joker 2, people like going over their to-do lists for tomorrow instead of being whisked away into a magical world of funny British humor and fishes and Kevin Kline speaking funky Italian. Anyway, it was not a good theatrical experience, but it is definitely something that just feels like it demands to be talked about.
It shows that the audience tells you the truth, man.
Yeah.
Good or bad. If a movie is good, if a movie's bad, the audience in a packed house will tell you the truth.
That is true. And the audience, Taylor, how was the audience reaction?
Lukewarm. We're talking about Joker?
Yeah, we're talking about
lukewarm.
Joker.
I feel like everyone kind of stepped, especially after the ending, which we'll get to the ending in a minute, but like especially with how the tone in which that the movie ended on, I feel like everyone was just kind of looking at each other being like, extra after credits scene?
I believe I quoted one person when we were leaving the theater literally turned to his friends, and I don't know what the context was in which they all came to the theater that night, but his exact words were, "I'm sorry you guys had to see that movie." And then
I know the backstory already. That guy was a huge fanboy of the first Joker movie. Understandably, it's a pretty good movie, and then cajoled his friends who are not huge fans of it to go see this movie, convinced that this would have to be good, and sure enough, his friends will never let him recommend a movie to them again, at least after a cooling off period of at least a full calendar year.
Absolutely. So I guess to tee us, if this is in fact potentially going to be our pilot episode, we should reintroduce ourselves. My name is Kyle Bogart. This here is
Taylor Stewart.
And this is
Cliff Bogart, brother of Kyle Bogart.
That's right. Cliff and I once had a podcast a long time ago where we talked about movies, and now every time we post to Instagram, someone posts something that says, hey, you guys should do a movie podcast again, and so here we are. Again, a podcast that hopefully will be about mostly old movies like A Fish Called Wanda, and not movies like Joker or the forthcoming Megalopolis, which we also will be seeing and talking about.
Exactly. It's an all-encompassing go to the theaters and see movies podcast. So we will be commenting and seeing, obviously, whatever's the new hot movie of the week when that is out. But yes, there's also a wonderful thing when the movies that are out suck. There's a wonderful thing called repertory screenings that take place in most major cities where you can find old movies like A Fish Called Wanda and other movies.
Repertory is a fancy word for when they made movies good still. And these screenings, thankfully, because we live in Austin, there are a bunch of them, and especially because we happen to be kicking this off in the month of October, Libra season. Because we happen to keep this kicking this off in the month of October, there's a ton of cool stuff coming up that we're hopefully going to get the chance to go and do, like the Paramount has a bunch of old movies coming up. They have a horror movie marathon. They have a bunch of cool screenings. So hopefully there's a screening coming up of Carrie playing in a church that I think we're going to hopefully try and go see. There's a bunch of cool stuff coming up. We're going to see what we can see out there, but also there are things like Joker 2 that need to be addressed right away.
It's also one of those movies that we kind of collectively realized we wanted to forget as quickly as possible, so kind of have to do the podcast right after we see it.
This is a group therapy session.
Fresh.
That's right, so we can process what happened and stuff. But by the way, Cliff, did you know that the Joker suffered emotional trauma when he was a kid, and therefore, did you think about that might, in fact, cause him to suffer from mental illness? Sorry, that was my Catherine Keener impression from Joker 2.
She did talk very, very slowly. An actress we're used to seeing speak very quickly with good dialogue.
Everyone talks slowly. It almost felt like we were watching a B-movie from the 50s where they were just trying to stretch it out to the full runtime with these sort of sub-Law and Order SVU quality court scenes that tediously rehashed the entire. But I'm getting ahead of myself.
Come on, Todd, you gotta rise to the Dick Wolf level minimally for a theatrical production.
Yes. Well, they really did need 8 or 9 scenes to get to the bottom of whether or not Joker has mental illness,
which we didn't know from the previous movie.
And when I say mental illness, I'm not summing up that conversation. Those are the literal words they use in that sort of, again, as if it's being written to be translated to Chinese audiences or something. That is literally, I think, the issue they're trying to get to the bottom of. Anyway, but not to get ahead of ourselves here, the movie we are talking about today is Joker 2, FOLIE À DEUX, I guess, fine, which came out October 4th. We can give it's starring Joaquin Phoenix, Lady Gaga, other people. It's directed by Todd Phillips. We'll get to the bottom of all of this here in a minute.
Sequel to the highest-grossing R-rated movie until Wolverine and Deadpool knocked it off. So a lot to live up to.
Yes, that's right. A lot of anticipation. It really, we forget that the first Joker film made $1 billion. I don't think this one is going to make quite as much money on word of mouth or anything like that. But no, we saw Joker 2. I could sum it up for you. I even copied onto this little document here, the Wikipedia summary for Joker. I don't want to read it. It's just, you know what it is, okay? It's the new fucking Joker movie starring Joaquin Phoenix. It's the sequel to the other one, etc. Right, Cliff?
They know that.
Cool.
But what they don't know is that it's a movie that seems to act as if the end of the previous movie didn't happen as we get into it. It suffers from that Alien 3 dilemma where sort of right from the beginning it bums you out when Hicks and Newt are dead and you can't quite get on board from the beginning. Fortunately, Alien 3 actually had some value of its own to look forward to watching it. Not so much in this movie. Now, at the beginning of this movie, I guess you can start where the state of Arthur Fleck and Joker.
All right, so the film begins with Arthur Fleck in Arkham Asylum, and to sum up the plot of the film continues with Arthur Fleck in Arkham Asylum. Various things happen, but every single one of those things that happens over the course of the film is a tedious courtroom scene where standing trial before Harvey Dent, another, not Billy D. Williams Harvey Dent, but a different one, standing in trial before Harvey Dent, we see a series of testimonies, all that essentially just rehash the events of the first film to add some new perspective, I guess, which we can get into in a minute. We were kind of getting into it a moment ago. And then, again, that might sound really tedious and boring, but here's the thing, guys. It is a musical, hey? So we will jump intermittently, because of his love affair with Harley Quinn, played by known popular singer and pop star Lady Gaga, into these big musical sequences where we will see him as the Joker kind of explode into color and something or else to kind of show the really bent, twisted perspective they have on love and all this other kind of stuff. Now, before we get into everything that this movie is, and that continues on for a bit, there's not really much to sum up until we really get to the end, but go ahead.
Well, yeah, let's talk about what it isn't, is I think where you were leading.
Yes, exactly. Which, just to tee that up, I think there is perhaps so little within the text of the Joker to praise, or Joker 2 to praise, that perhaps maybe a better place to start as to kind of teeing us up as to what the expectations might be any reasonable audience member's expectations might be going into this, a Harley Quinn Joker 70s crime movie that is also a musical. Fine, I will even give you that. What might one expect going into a movie? We cannot, unfortunately, look at the film as is. We must look at worlds unmanifested to talk about the virtues of this film. So, Cliff, what might that film look like?
What that film would look like is pretty straightforward. I think if any audience member who walked out of Joker 1 would imagine that Arthur Fleck, having fully embraced his Joker personality, and at the end of Joker 1, seen him kill his therapist, apparently, and run away with bloody footprints, we are to assume that, having thrown away his old, kind of mopey, sad self, he's fully embraced his Joker persona in Arkham Asylum. They can't control him. He's violent. He's Hannibal Lecter. But sure enough, he falls in love with Harley Quinn, a gal who's such a fan of him that she checks herself in, and they fall in love and hatch a plan to escape. And we expect about maybe a third of the way in, he will escape, and they will go on a crime spree. Yeah. Perhaps a Bonnie and Clyde style crime spree, if Todd Phillips wants to rip off another famous movie.
That's sort of what we're talking about.
Integrate musical sequences into it. As they're robbing a bank or killing someone in an alley, it can be done up as a big musical sequence, and then we cut back to reality, and it's all stark and ugly, and we see the contrast between their fantasy and the ugly reality. We can even do a little bit of that while still satisfying our desire.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, just to sum up, I think considering the first film is a knockoff of a Scorsese movie, take a different New Hollywood movie. Take Bonnie and Clyde, two icons of New Hollywood, thanks to Warren Beatty, and just knock off that movie. And again, the reasons for this are obvious, and we will get to them in a moment, because it's not for a lack of awareness, I don't think, that the film isn't a Bonnie and Clyde story. It's not for the sake of studio notes meddling and overcomplicating something, like the myriad overcomplicated Terminator sequels that never seem to get the whole Rise of the Machines thing quite right. It's not for any of those reasons. It is for the reason that the film seems to be deliberately antagonistic toward the very audience that would show up to see the film, and that audience's expectation to see that type of a fun movie. And so again, to shelve that for a moment, one could very easily now see, as anyone might expect, Joker and Harley Quinn meet in Arkham Asylum. She helps him bust out. They even do, if we still want to add the trial component, they do a crime. They rob something. And all the while, in a natural-born killers-esque way, we are jumping back and forth between their fantasy and their reality, but their fantasy are lavish musical sequences, and the whole irony, of course, of musicals are that they are sweet and wholesome and romantic, and therefore it puts a canted, cracked mirror view on their violence so that we see their violence through the eyes of their love for each other rather than through the grisly reality which will be revealed through stark and sudden contrasts between the musical world that we're seeing and the real world. And that is not at all what this movie is, not formally, not in intention, not even in sort of anyway. So let's.
Not even if you squint your eyes
a little bit, not even from 50 feet away. And so I guess first we can maybe talk about what the film actually is, what the experience of the film is, and then get to some of the surprising and yet in retrospect tragically unsurprising whys involved in all of this, which seem which and just to kind of cut to the chase here before as we open it up into more of what the movie's about, it's a film that is not just bad, but it is a film that feels so wrong-headed in its intention and execution that it retroactively makes the first film worse. You know, it's
just like Matrix Reloaded,
just like Matrix 2. Yes, just like Matrix 2. It's like, again, and that is an apt comparison because there is, say what you will about the Wachowskis and their post-Matrix output, but there is an obvious attempt to, in Matrix, whatever the fucking second one's called,
Reloaded.
Who gives a shit? To walk back the hero's narrative they've created in the first film. So the first film is about a Luke Skywalker-like hero rising, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And instead of continuing that story, they attempt to deconstruct that story and walk that story back. Again, I remember a similar complaint about Matrix Reloaded at the time was Neo sort of, at the denouement of the first Matrix film, is revealed to be all-powerful. He literally flies away like Superman, and then at the beginning of the next film appears to just be his normal self again. So the film quite literally
He's
has to...
slightly better at fighting than the other folks.
They address it, you know, or something.
Maybe.
But the point is they quite literally walk things back so that a story can happen and then spend the rest of the film, as they do, spending, because they made all the money in the world off the first film, just cycling through a series of philosophical discussions which are intended to deconstruct and undermine all of what the first film was about. That's fine. I will say, and I can't believe it, but Joker 2 is making me say positive things about The Matrix 2. I will say that The Matrix 2, at least, there seemed to be a honest intention behind it, a real desire to synthesize some aspect of the first film into a new context that didn't feel so completely wrong-headed.
At least they use big words.
I suppose so. But when you look at something like Joker 2, and we can kind of unpack what it is and the whys about it, it appears to be quite literally, and I mean, by wrong-headed, I mean a film that, I don't know, like as if the filmmakers are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. A filmmaker that is attempting to appease its abusers. A filmmaker that has made a film that is meant to appeal only to those people who had contempt for the first film and walk back every intention of that first film or everything that was appealing about it to the extent that, and has kind of this false heretical posturing while at the same time being an exceptionally safe and sort of dumb film, kind of like the first one was, but, you know, notwithstanding. Does all of these things all while attempting to sort of apologize for, recontextualize, and walk back its own work and its own advocates and its own sort of energy from the first film. So it's a film that essentially attempts to like redress the idea that the first film itself was some sort of moral a crime. There's something morally dubious about the very existence of the first film, which, if, let us say, this were the 80s at the height of, like, are action films too violent? There were films that were often very violent, and then there was some sort of walk back, and, like, I'm thinking of the whole subplot in Lethal Weapon 3 about guns being bad, all of that kind of bullshit. You know, that would be one thing, but instead, instead, the film appears to not only hold that there's something morally dubious about the existence of the first film as such, but does it in a context where the film had an aggressively negative campaign against it in its own time, when it was released. That is to say, if we're talking about a film that a sequel that seems to be apologizing for the first film, walking back the first film, treating the events of the first film as if there is something morally dubious about it, within the context of Todd Phillips made $1 billion, he got nominated for lots of Oscars, but lots of cool and hip people were so preoccupied with frowning upon the film's morally dubious nature in advance of its existence, and we were there when it was released, and you might remember this. Some of you might have been alive in 2019. People remember that there was this weird frenzy around the release of the film, that the film would either cause violence or violence would happen in the theaters, or there was just something morally dubious and wrong-headed about its very existence.
Well, there was that one shooting where that guy had the Joker mask.
Exactly.
There are 4 Joker movies.
And there seemed to be people utterly preoccupied with scaring people into not even showing up to the theaters to see it. And yet, in spite of all of that, it rallied against that opposition and succeeded.
Maybe because of it, with the Streisand effect.
Streisand effect, exactly. Succeeded in that way, became symbolic of some things that were potentially part of the intentions of the filmmaker and some things that weren't. And yet, to make the sequel, rather than also making something that seems kind of delightfully heretical or whatever, it's entirely preoccupied, literally to the extent that the bulk of the film is witnesses talking about how morally dubious the actions of the first film. Did you know that when you stabbed that guy to death in front of me, Arthur, it hurt my feelings and now I'm scared? Holy shit, guys. Did you know that murder has consequences, and one of the consequences of murder isn't just murder, it's emotional trauma. And as we all know, there's nothing worse than emotional trauma. And because nothing is worse than emotional trauma, Arthur wasn't necessarily overly concerned with the person whose head he opened up in front of himself, but when he learned that he had caused emotional trauma to the tiny, tiny man, that was really the thing for him. And okay, so was that like a key scene in the movie? That was sort of like the scene where RoboCop goes back and visits the house, and it's like real, and it's really emotional, but that sort of sticks out on it. No, not at all. The rest of the film is also other people you barely fucking remember from the first film, explaining things you barely fucking remember from the first film, and then letting the audience know that they also were kind of creeped out by the obviously creepy, crazy guy, and it goes on and on and on. Anyway, but the film literally is preoccupied with agreeing with the people who approached the film in bad faith in the first place, and one can only assume that the reasons are essentially that after having made $1 billion and gotten an Oscar, that Todd Phillips would really like to be let back into some sort of club, and this weird, weak sauce apologia for his first film is his half-hearted, limp-dicked attempt to get back into that club. And that is what we saw, as limp as Arthur Fleck himself, and noodly as his tiny little not-muscled body, this thing sort of shat itself upon the screen. Anyway, but we should actually get into the movie now, instead of just teeing it up.
And I do wonder, was he trying to get back into what he perceived incorrectly as the cool kids table by making it a musical, perhaps? Because, well, who knows? Hollywood loves musicals.
Yes.
All them silly Hollywood queens are super into musicals, and so I can then get back in their good favor.
The musical is the fake punk rock posturing of the movie. The musical is the thing that allows him, in his own mind, to cash in on making a sequel while still maintaining some punk rock dimension. The ultimate twist at the end of the movie, which we'll get to, which, I mean, I suppose in a literal sense, rewrites and ruins the first film in a lot of different ways, but obviously that's sort of the fun joke of the whole movie, at least in its intention. All of that fine, but it's the thing that allows him to sort of cash in on doing a sequel while maintaining a sort of faux punk rock posturing while not even fully committing to that joke. Because again, for all the greater criticisms that we might have or people might have about it ruins the character of the Joker, I don't give a shit about any of that. Even the twist ending could work. And I honestly think on some level, perhaps even the twist ending is what he thought he had in his back pocket to get people on board or blow their minds or something. I'm not sure. But could work if the film prior to that that's the thing that doesn't quite jive. If you wanted to completely undermine the idea of Arthur Fleck and keep him in the asylum and ultimately reveal, I guess, slight spoilers here, that he might not be who you think he is, he might never actually face Batman, he might not do any of those things, etc. The way you actually pull off that kind of subversive movie is you first have to seduce the audience. You cannot subvert the audience before you have seduced them into some way of thinking. So if you deliver a raucous Bonnie and Clyde-like musical that has incredibly well-executed musical sequences that actually function the way musical sequences are supposed to function, so we actually understand when we're getting into them what emotions they are being written toward. They actually sound good. His voice doesn't sound shitty because he's the Joker in the asylum, but in his own head he sings very, very beautifully, which you could even do with him and have him be ADR'd like they did with Beetlejuice speaking Italian in the much better Beetlejuice 2 that came out last week. You could have ADR'd his voice, and that would have with someone who sings beautifully, and that would have worked too. But you would have if you had seduced the audience into a romantic, fantastic musical where we are intermittently and disappointedly reminded that the reality is dark, or that they still haven't made it out of the asylum. If I even want, let's even just assume, even that's a shitty idea.
A little too much like that stupid Zack Snyder movie, but why not?
Dude, this movie gives you reasons to say nice things about that Zack Snyder.
What the fuck is that Zack Snyder movie?
I don't fucking remember.
It's the one with the
Doesn't matter. Sucker Punch.
Sucker Punch.
Yeah. If you do all of that, if you seduce the audience into the romance and they're genuinely romantically caught up in the drama between Lady Gaga and the Joker, but that exists within the lavish, well-executed musicals that tell a story and each of the songs build upon each other and develop, etc., 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 then when you eventually spiral down towards the dark, nihilistic, and sort of self-negating Joker-like joke at the end of the movie, where the Joker maybe isn't the Joker, etc., 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 then the audience, who was so taken and so whisked away and so caught up in that romance, feels like they've had the rug torn out from under them. And now you've subverted something, you've done something, you've created energy and dissipated it towards some sort of focused purpose. But if you don't deliver that in the beginning, or in fact fail because you lack the facility, or even as in the case of this movie, appear to lack even the commitment or focus to even attempt to mount that musical or tell that romantic Bonnie and Clyde-like story or do anything, and instead give a series of scenes that feel like they were slowly pawed through and figured out in the dark, which just you can't help but have heard in the interim. I don't know much about the production of this movie, but I did hear something about Todd Phillips saying that they would largely throw away the script and just improvise with stuff. And you know what? It feels like that. Or if you tell a film where it doesn't seem to really commit in a hard way to, is Joaquin Phoenix supposed to be pulling off these musical numbers in a way that is incredibly satisfying and evocative of how he sees himself in a way that is very distant from the gritty reality? Or that he really does sing flatly, like at Woody Allen's Everybody Says I Love You, and that's kind of the joke, but that is contextualized with enough color and enough pizzazz around it so that it kind of works, and his bad singing is kind of ironic in that way. That could also work. But if instead you just shoot a bunch of footage, and then in this footage, he's kind of half singing Frank Sinatra tunes over here, and then someone else is half mumbling into The Saints are marching in over here, and then over here you're cutting to Lady Gaga singing in a mirror, and it's never really clear when people are singing or not or whatever. You don't even get the energetic release of the gag of seeing Joker in a big musical number and then suddenly and abruptly cutting back to reality and seeing him arms spread in the middle of the asylum with everyone snickering. No moment that deft occurs in the entire runtime of the film. It's just meandering, vague, gray shades of half
the closest you get to that type of scene, I would say, is like when he's watching the news of some part of his trial or some point, and he starts singing around now that he's met Lady Gaga or Harley's character or whatnot, and he's like singing around again very flatly, and then it just cuts to him instead just still standing in front of the TV just kind of laughing to himself. Like that's the closest.
You're right, yes, and that is the closest we get. But again, that entire moment kind of is a microcosm of the whole movie, because first of all, back to front, everything about it is so viscerally unappealing to experience and to be around that it falls just flat on the screen. It just feels like something that could be half as long or twice as long, and it would achieve the same generally unpleasant purpose. It's also obviously, it's shot in kind of a long take with Joaquin Phoenix just meandering around the room, indicative of they took the one bathroom moment from the first film, which was they talked about being largely improvised, and decided to just make that the modus operandi for the entire film. And it cannot fully commit to the joke of it being a musical to begin us in a grounded and grisly world, then show him transcend into some other perspective. Anything, and again,
he starts out in the one shot singing kind of grittily and bad and rough, as if the real Arthur Fleck were singing in the room, which creates the illusion that is he breaking out into song in the room for a second, because he is singing really bad, but if it is a fantasy, it could take us away. He starts singing good and starts dancing with the guards, and there's a bunch of ways.
There's a bunch of ways to skin a cat. Like we were saying, he could sing beautifully suddenly, and then the prison becomes the thing, a la Chicago. Or we could just jump into a surreal world full of big Busby Berkeley musicals where he's singing flatly over the top of it. If you really want to be more punk rock about the thing, I mean, they had $200 million to waste on this piece of shit, so they could have built a bigger set or two, motherfucker.
Oh my gosh, where were the sets? Like that, every time there was like even a little bit of I would say a little bit of effort in the sets. It's like I feel like this looks CG in a bad way. I feel like this is a real set that looks like bad CGI.
And looks small and looks. They needed more poisonous green lights to put on the outside of that building, unfortunately, so they couldn't build. And they had no money left over, unfortunately, for any Busby Berkeley musical sets in their $200 million film that takes place in essentially 3 locations. They had no money left. But anyway, so, all right, so let's take that for a minute. So Todd Phillips has decided to crumple up the actually making the musical function as a musical thing and just throw it away. He's not doing that anymore. So now we're just going to hang out vaguely around these people in the asylum, and they're going to sing flatly or not, and various people will sing, and some people will join in or not, or what, or we'll get half a song, it doesn't matter. And then at other moments, almost in defiance of them having any meaning or emotional continuity, we will just randomly cut to scenes from La La Land or something that literally have no springboard within reality that we can discern. Like there's a moment he meets Lady Gaga, and then later on there's the scene kind of where she puts makeup on his face, and in the middle of it, like it just cuts to a musical set piece of the moon, and she's in front of it, and completely unceremoniously we see Joaquin Phoenix walk out smoking a cigarette in full Joker makeup for the first time in the dream sequence, which has been prompted by nothing. This is not immediately in the wake of some moment of transcendence. It comes in the wake of nothing. He just appears with makeup on. They dance around on this very small set piece in front of a moon for a moment, and then that ends. And then the scene in the cell begins where she says, "A guard let me in," and then they kind of half have sex or whatever, and then she puts makeup on his face. Now imagine, just take those two moments and shuffle them like a deck of cards. So we enter into that scene where she says that we see her silhouetted in front of the moon. Then we cut to her waking him up. "A guard let me in." It's as if he was dreaming about her. Then she puts the makeup on his face and they start to have sex. And then we intercut to the shot of him in slow motion walking out with the makeup on his face, smoking a cigarette. Then there's at least, that's why I feel the film seems to be almost defiantly attempting to negate meaning at all. Negate meaning at every turn, in the sense that even where, again, they had $200 million, a competent editor, and I know because I've had many good and competent editors work with us and for us over the years. A competent editor, what's up? Oh, am I getting out of the
You're trying to
frame?
scoot off.
But a competent editor would shuffle the deck on those two moments, would look for meaning and try and create it. Instead, we jump to a completely and utterly disconnected La La Land club sequence where they dance around for a while and it's full of energy that then just ends. Da Dirk. And then we pick back up with another part of the movie. So it's as if the film is literally just, again, a series of shots or production elements that have been put in a blender, again, with an almost kind of adversarial attitude towards any kind of catharsis, any emotional momentum or romance being built up between Lady Gaga and Arthur Fleck. So it basically is working the entire time to negate any energy being built up to be deployed in any direction. So when you get to its twist ending at the end of the movie, you have no romantic otherworld to be yanked out from the audience when you find out Lady Gaga's been lying to him or whatever the thing. You have no visceral, exciting fantasy of a Joker that existed in his mind or through the one crime they committed before he then gets thrown back in jail, etc., to then get stolen away from you, etc., when you realize he's not going to go on and fight Batman one day. You have no energy coming up against no momentum, coming up against no emotional anything, and then it just sort of dies and lands flatly. So anyway, so you throw away all that stuff, and what do you have left over, Cliff? What is this movie? What is the Joker 2?
A waste of 2.5 hours.
Yes, there you go.
That is one way to define it.
That is one way to define it. So, I don't know.
That was kind of, I'll say this, watching the movie, you keep kind of waiting for him to either escape, and then he kind of escapes, and then he gets sucked back into the movie, and then you just kind of keep waiting for something to happen. And then by the time that something actually happens, you're like 10 minutes away from the end of the movie, and then you get the reveal, and it's like you just are questioning.
Yeah, and I guess that's sort of that, and I guess that does make a good point, which is the fact that there are ways in which certain of these reveals and things could work if they just committed in advance to delivering any kind of a satisfying movie. But I think we all felt collectively among the sparsely populated audience in the theater when they...
By the way, the tickets showed that they were sold out on the Alamo app, but I noted the chunk of seats all next to me were all empty. Looks like people got the word out, heard the word out, and just didn't show up or canceled their tickets.
Yeah, that is
on a Friday night.
It was
opening
Friday
night.
The theater for Fish Called Wanda was definitely more full. But if you don't deliver that movie, if you don't kind of do all of that kind of stuff, then what is it? Well, you have those moments that play better, honestly, in the trailer than they do in the movie.
I was just playing the trailer in my head.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
Like,
it's like, which was a phenomenon. I remember watching Michael Bay's Transformers movies, another Mechanist director who would have big, lavish moments in his trailers, like the Transformers movies, which would work better in the trailers than they would in the films themselves, because in the trailer, when you see Joker and Harley Quinn running from Arkham Asylum and climbing a fence you imagine a context around that. You imagine a cinematic context around that in which there is romance that has led to this moment. They are freeing themselves to go do more exciting things because, again, this is a movie produced by Hollywood that's meant to deliver those exciting things. It's a comic book movie. They had $200 million to spend on it. Instead, the film drags them back to Arkham Asylum. And then when Joker escapes later on after his trial, there's a big comic book moment. That must have been...
There's lots of opportunities, lots of opportunities for the movie to take a good turn. You're hoping all the way till the end. My experience with the movie is I hoped against hope that it could possibly be good and was trying to give it the benefit of the doubt. Yeah. And the thing is, there's, many opportunities, as mentioned, for it to have taken a positive turn, even that might have retroactively justified some of the stuff earlier. Like I mentioned, we open the movie with Arthur Fleck being kind of, back to his old mopey, not jokery self. But then we see kind of early on, he has a scene with a therapist who is, I believe, the same actress or similar looking actress who was the therapist who we imply he murders at the end of the first Joker. So it's like, okay, he murdered. Now we see how that happens, and then we go off from there. That doesn't happen. Yeah. Then we have, the escape attempt that could have been an escape attempt. Then we have a second escape attempt that could have been an escape attempt. And here's the thing:
I am, even if you're willing to take the underlying conceit of the entire, because again, if we're talking about why do they not get out of Arkham Asylum, why do they not whatever, it's ultimately, again, a misguided and wrong intended attempt to serve the ultimate reveal at the end of the film. Again, if we're being generous here about why it is, and it's not just to, for other reasons, but if we're being generous, it's to serve that ultimate reveal. That is to say, if Arthur Fleck gets out and does crimes, he is in essence some form of the Joker, which undermines the full nature of the reveal, blah, blah, blah. Sure. But whether it's through the musical sequences or whether it's through seeing them escape, get out, perform a crime, and then come back, even if it's erased from the newspapers or whatever after it happens. But either one of those things creates a dynamic tension, a dynamic division between that ultimate reveal. In other words, if the film remains exactly within the tonal and reality space of the reveal of Arthur Fleck, quivering in some asylum at the beginning and quivering in some asylum at the end, and he just is quivering and weird at every moment between, then you create a tedious and non-functional experience that can't affect anyone in any way other than to bore them and to make them think about emails. Anyway.
Yeah.
Tell you what. Oh, so here's the thing, y'all, and so let's talk about this for a second. And we've said a lot of things about the movie so far, how it feels like some sort of weak-ass apology for the first film. We've said that it feels like completely misguided in its lack of commitment even to the idea of being a musical, but we haven't addressed one other aspect of the film, which is that it is dumb. It is very dumb.
It's so dumb.
Yeah, and I mean it's dumb, and I just mean this on the level of we forget that the first film, and this is one of the ways in which the second film somewhat retroactively ruins the first film, is the first film manages to cultivate and deliver a subversive and intelligent subtext. But it does so by just ripping off the intelligent and subversive subtext of a different film, The King of Comedy. A lot of people reference Taxi Driver too, and it certainly has some tonal elements to that, but it's King of Comedy. And essentially the film starts out on a pitch level as the meme of what if you remade King of Comedy about a lonely, antisocial, lonely man comedian, and you made that the origin story for the Joker. Why? You could imagine all the scenes right now in your head. What an exciting idea that is. And then they executed that movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and they did all of those things, and they cultivated this interesting and subversive subtext. What we learn now from Joker 2 is that subtext apparently was an accident, or entirely because it was lifted from The King of Comedy, and the film really had nothing it was attempting to say or do, and that, which in retrospect, it's not really so much in retrospect, or we identified this at the time when talking about this movie, I think on the old podcast, is that pretty much every moment in the movie is as dumbly written as it would be in a DC comic books movie. There's no, and this applies equally now to Joker 2, but there's not like a really, weird or unique or interesting parsing of psychology, or to pick the words that are in vogue these days, trauma. It's all like a pretty rote Law and Order SVU episode. The
words are dumb. The intelligence is in the subtext around it.
Exactly. The intelligence, honestly, is there to be projected onto the production design and performance of Joaquin Phoenix. And we can talk about, there's a lot of filmmakers, not unlike Ridley Scott this year, who also attempted to deliver the entire soul of his movie, handed over to Joaquin Phoenix to just be the sort of subtext at the center of the movie, and also was a disastrous failure, but that's a conversation for another time. But Joker 2, it appears that absent ripping off another better movie, the film has nothing to say, and therefore had nothing to say in the first place, and therefore really was that nothing more than that meme. It essentially is just the meme of, what if you did King of Comedy, but the Joker, but as the origin story of the Joker. And any greater depth or any greater meaning was an accident lost upon the filmmakers when they were making it, and something they actively attempted to walk back with the sequel in the next film. And stuff. So, anywho. But in the second film, a film that is largely a trial film, largely a film that takes place in an asylum.
I would say 60% in a trial.
60% in a trial, the other 60% in an asylum.
There's a couple movies you could rip off there that could be good for even that.
Exactly. Like, if you made something...
Where's my Nurse Ratched?
Exactly. If you had something that had even attempted the depth of knocking off One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, or attempted the depth of knocking off something like Primal Fear.
Or they even had like that one guard character that was like kind of a friend, but then he was abusive because he like, the one scene where he's like, thanks buddy, and he like smacks him in the back of the head. And then later on he like turns against him and does a bunch of those violent acts, both to Arthur and then like to that one friend of his. And so it's like, if he had been nicer at the front half, I would have been more betrayed by his meanness. But then, like, you just never really knew how to...
just sort of one tone, one feel throughout the whole movie. But my thing is just, if you have $200 million to spend, and you clearly have carte blanche to do whatever the fuck you want, because you're delivering not a Bonnie and Clyde story, not an action movie, not a comic book movie, you clearly have... They were given the keys to the castle to make whatever... kind of movie you want. One of the things that may have been available to them as an option would be to write some sort of intelligent character study, something that, again, like the aforementioned films, like a weird, twisted killer story, like a Silence of the Lambs, or like a Primal Fear, does something interesting with split personalities, does something interesting and cool with the idea of an imprisoned guy still having influence outside of his cell merely because of his image. You could do all sorts of interesting things with that idea. But this film, again, plays like it's a Law & Order SVU episode. That is to say, the detectives are never saying literally they're saying things like, he killed 5 people, one of them on national television. And the lines given to Joaquin Phoenix are, I killed 5 people, one of them on national television. The lines, Catherine Keener, who's supposed to be the sort of feminine, maternal defender of him, does she deliver some sort of monologue about something ineffable about him or the human spirit or something unique about him to try and defend him or try and access the empathy of the jurors that's well written? No, instead she says, hello, doctor, man on the stand. Are you sure you did all of the medical and psychological tests on him? And I'm not making this up. This is literally the text of the movie. Then the doctor says something to the effect of, I examined all of the medical and psychological tests done on Arthur Fleck. He doesn't...
But only for 89 minutes.
Yes, again, only for 89 minutes, exactly. He doesn't describe a scenario or explain an inkblot test and paint a picture for what Arthur did or did not do. It doesn't do anything. He tells us the fact that he has done all of the psychological and medical tests, Cliff. The medical ones, Taylor, and the psychological ones, and having looked at them, he has determined, and this is the entirety of the text of his medical opinion he submits, that Arthur does not have mental illness. Now, that doesn't even
Not
make
even
sense.
ruling out particular kinds of mental illness.
But that's the point, is that doesn't even make sense on a textual level. I don't care that it doesn't make sense, but it does. It's not even the sufficient amount of syllables to get the point across, which is the point is that no, he's not a split personality guy who has two personalities. This is like soap opera shit. Like a soap opera dives deeper by saying, no, I'm not saying he's not crazy. You could literally hear it as a soap opera. I'm not saying that Devon isn't crazy. He's obviously crazy if he killed that woman. I'm just saying this split personality act of his is a ruse he's trying to play off on all of you. That's what you say. You don't say he killed 5 people. He's dressed as a clown. Everyone is on board with the idea that he has mental illness. That's not even the text of what's being debated. The text of what's being debated, in actuality, would be whether or not he this or that. So again, if you have the ability to make any movie you want to make, then presumably you would venture in your movie that apparently, if one were to distill a theme from the film, the only theme I could conceive of is that psychology exists. Woo! But if you were to distill a theme from it, then you would write a nuanced film about psychology and get it in there. And you can't say, well, they couldn't do that because it was a comic book movie. No, they could do whatever the fuck they wanted, obviously, because the whole, there's nothing in this film that in any way speaks to they couldn't do whatever the fuck they want. So it only speaks to a lack of depth, a lack of facility, a lack of actually any meaning that the filmmakers themselves can wring from the character of Joker. Which is why, and they know this, they've turned over every single scene in the film to Joaquin Phoenix to fuck around and do whatever he wants in a desperate attempt that alchemically meaning will manifest itself. Whoops. It didn't work for Ridley Scott, and it's not going to work for you, buddy. Anyway, it's just... So the point is, even on the level of you make every all right, the whole twist is that he's not the Joker. Fine. Then seduce me and whisk me away into a world so that's some sort of romantic world that it's a betrayal at the end. That's energy being deployed for some useful purpose. Or do exactly the thing I just said. Do your shitty version of the movie that stays in the fucking asylum the whole time. Do all that fucking shit. Do the same thing, but prove us wrong by making it such a weird and complex and nuanced and intelligent dissecting of whatever the fuck you're trying to dissect, or rebuke of whatever it is you're trying to rebuke, or a scathing sort of satire of whatever you're trying to satirize. Do that and silence all critics. But they don't do that, do they? No, instead it lacks even the psychological depth of the average Law & Order SVU episode, because the Law & Order SVU has done so many trials that they just have to make up new words and new shits and new fetishes and new things that people say in trials. If you were to ask ChatGPT to deliver you dialogue for a trial scene in a Law & Order SVU episode, it would be better than the dialogue, which is just the literal expositor, not even the subtext, just the literal practical exposition of the thing, rotely. I have examined the medical tests, and it doesn't even function, actually. It kind of does, and it does feel like dialogue by AI, because no human possibly could have written or approved of those lines. Conspiracy theory, Todd Phillips is later on going to reveal that he so didn't want to make Joker 2, all the scenes were written by ChatGPT. Think about it. that's the joke.
They just they do say the same phrasing multiple times over and over again. You
Yes.
can almost make a drinking game how often they literally say just the phrase, he killed 5 people, one person on live TV. I think like 3 or 4 different characters say that exact phrase amongst other courtroom phrases or whatnot, but it literally is the same dialogue.
And
although I will throw out, just completely unrelated to the topic, I was reading through like the Wikipedia breakdown of what the synopsis was after this, as I do post movies, and I did notice they specifically called out that the opposing lawyer had scarring on half his face, and I'm just calling it now. If they do call a third one, that's going to be Two-Face.
well, no, that is the character of Two-Face.
Okay. I don't know these things.
Yeah,
Cool.
Two-Face's human identity is
so-
Harvey Dent.
Confirmed there.
Oh, there you
that's
go.
hilarious.
So
Okay.
there you go. No, that character. Yes, no. I love you so much, you sweet angel.
I was
Welcome
like, I
to the
put
podcast.
the pieces together. Okay, that's funny.
No, I love you.
Well,
No, that's when I said, So the character of Harvey Dent, which is funny, has
so
appeared now
funny.
in lots of movies, not yet as the Two-Face
The
to be.
aforementioned Billy D. Williams played him in the 1989 Batman,
Yes,
and we
indeed.
never got to see,
We never got to see
a Two-Face.
So-
Yeah,
we
we
will
got
never
we got-
see this guy as Two-Face either. So sorry, that completely wiped my hard drive. What were we talking about? What were we talking about a moment ago?
Let's see.
The Joker, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, I think it was still on Joe.
we're
Haven't moved
still
on
on
to Fish
Joker.
Called Wanda yet.
No, I don't think we're quite making it to a fish call. We just wanted to have a simple podcast, talk about old movies like
go
A Fish Called
see
Wanda.
A Fish Called Wanda.
Well,
That
you-
is really good.
If you
If you ever get the chance to see it in the theater, I strongly recommend it.
If you live in the city of Austin, Texas, or surrounding vicinity, you may still be able to catch it at the AFS Cinema.
So this is something I wanted to address. So to again, not to beat a dead horse here, but to speak towards the devastating lack of psychological depth of a movie that is ostensibly about psychology, I guess, if it's about anything at all.
Social criticism, but didn't even really try to do it this time.
It doesn't even really attempt it, no. Remember, Cliff, murder, fine, but there are people in the room when you murder them, and they could get traumatized. So psychology is a thing, Cliff. Which, Cliff, I don't know.
Puddles is the real victim.
I don't know if you picked up on this because Catherine Keener told us about it before, but when he was young, the Joker was also abused, too. So, there you go. But anyway, sorry. To speak to the lack of depth of the film, a Warner Brothers film, opens with a Looney Tunes cartoon, which they have, again, the film has an embarrassment of riches. They
Oh my
literally
gosh.
use the Merry Melodies song, which is, again, a great way to open the movie. Love it. Merry Melodies, you actually hear the Looney Tunes theme song. It starts, and then what follows is hilarious only in retrospect, in the sense that it is doesn't resemble in any way a Looney Tunes or a Chuck Jones cartoon. What a great way, and this is a perfect example of the entire film in microcosm, to get you on board with the musical that would be coming, would be to let you into Joker's world, where you see a bunch of hilarious gags playing out, where he's obviously performing horrendous acts of violence on people, but in the goofy, heightened reality of a Chuck Jones cartoon, shooting someone in the face with a shotgun causes the ash to be all over their face instead, and their duckbill to be turned around backwards, instead of them to be killed. And then at the end, you could grimly pull back and somehow have some sort of reveal of something else within the context of that Looney Tunes cartoon, something dark. But instead of that, which would serve the same function as all of the musical sequences in the movie we didn't get, instead we get something that attempts to actually literalize. It's called Joker and His Shadow. And this might be the dumbest thing in the dumb runtime of the movie, because they attempt to just deliver you yet another unsatisfying and unfunny and poorly executed series of minutes that lack the facility even of a bad Looney Tunes episode, and instead literalize the idea of the Jungian shadow, where Joker's dancing around with his shadow, who's slowly putting on his makeup, which is a really great idea if you're making a fucking short film and you're a freshman at USC, you piece of shit. But if it is a Looney Tunes cartoon. It's not satisfying or interesting or funny. It's just him dancing around and putting on a suit and makeup, and it's a literal shadow like Peter Pan, which is a Disney movie, which is a romantic movie that has nothing to do with Chuck Jones or anything like that. And again, if you do it literalizes the idea of the Jungian shadow as if to create a big flashing neon sign at the beginning of the movie that says that we're supposed to be reading the film through a, get this guys, psychological prism. This film set in an asylum where they dive into psychology to the extent that they use the phrase mental illness 18 times to just holistically about the whole thing. Again, it decides to just sacrifice, again, any satisfying jokes.
Had Todd Phillips read one book on mental illness while writing the screenplay, he'd have had more words to use for mental illness besides mental illness.
Yes, had Todd Phillips read one book, then we would have a different film. Now, It is a film that inspires angry emotions because it is a film that condescends the very idea of making itself. Therefore, it is a bad faith movie. And sadly, we have gotten several films in the last decade with hundreds of millions of dollars behind them sometimes that feel like they were created in bad faith, that they were created in bad faith almost to antagonize the very people who enjoy those very films. And what is surprising about it happening within the context of the Joker is it feels like it is a non-functional, bad faith apology to something that no one was necessarily asking for an apology for, because the first film appeared to, at least as far as Hollywood gave a shit at all, superlatively vanquished all of its critics by doing the only two things Hollywood cares about: making a shit ton of money, $1 billion, and getting a bunch of fucking awards, got nominated for Oscars. And the response to that was not to become fucking engorged and erect and fucking run through a brick wall with the second movie, but instead to retreat with his tail between his legs into some sort of half-assed watering down of his first film. Anyway, sorry, I feel like every time we get off on one of these tangents, it just becomes some sort of weird. Anyway, but what were the good things about Joker 2, you guys? What were anything good?
I feel like the cliche answer is when it ended.
Yes, no, that's true.
I would say that
in a sense, yes.
Yeah.
We can get to the end.
No. I will say, I personally did like Lady Gaga. I'm a semi fan of Lady Gaga still. I haven't really kept up with her shenanigans, but I liked her music a lot when she was a pop star, and I liked her in the Star Is Born movie. And so I liked her aspects. I didn't know so much about her character arc per se, but she did a fine job. Being Harley Quinn, I liked all of her makeup and wardrobe. The makeup and the wardrobes in these movies this movie was very fun and good. If you wanted to give it some sort of compliment.
I mean, that's the thing is that I when I talk about the film truly has an embarrassment of riches because the film had Lady Gaga there.
Oh, I'm usually like $200 million.
200 exactly. The film has an embarrassment of riches because they should be fucking embarrassed that they had $200 million. No, they had an embarrassment of riches in the sense that anyone, just do it right now. Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn. Close your eyes. Yep, that version was better. That version you just thought of. But we could get into the ending of the thing. Spoilers, I guess. I don't give a shit because you'll see this movie or you won't or shouldn't. But you kind of have to discuss spoilers or you have to discuss the ending because if one were to rationalize this film as anything other than a kind of weak-ass apology for the first film, what would that be? It would be... It's all in service of the reveal, the big joke in this Joker movie, the big ha ha ha. Then there's there's a subtext to that makes sense in the Joker as total spirit of anarchy that has been created. That's sort of innate within the DC world right now, which is all goes back to Christopher Nolan creating The Dark Knight and Batman Begins, which is everything has sort of been slavishly brought into alignment around tonally. in that the Joker, Heath Ledger in that film, has multiple contradictory origin stories, and that contradiction is not reconciled within the text of that film, which creates an underlying tone of an unreliable narrator, which is then capitalized on in the King of Comedy knockoff version of the first film, as we learn that Fight Club, essentially. That's the reveal at the end. The Zazie Beetz is Fight Club, and he doesn't, in fact, have any kind of relationship with this girl, and he's just a really lonely guy, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah, she was only in it for the fantasy, and once he throws off the facade of being a Joker, spoiler alert if we're talking about it, he basically says there is no Joker, there is only the normal Arthur boy. And so therefore Harley Quinn is no longer interested in normal Arthur boy, and she's only in for the fantasy. And then it turns out that normal Arthur boy is in fact double not the Joker.
Yes, and that sort of is the joke at the end. So the final scenes involve, without getting into too much detail, seeing that Arthur Fleck dies. Therefore, and he dies in Arkham, never having escaped, never having faced Batman. Batman does not even exist yet. Never having ever been a crime lord of any kind. So therefore, in the most literal sense, the big joke at the end of the Joker, the payoff, is that Arthur Fleck is not the Joker. Therefore, we have followed over the course of this 2-film arc a guy who has no hero narrative, has no vengeance he's going to seek upon society, has no final act. He is in fact just a sad, weird guy who kills someone on TV. Ha ha. In that even the $200 million becomes part of the joke. Ha ha ha, we tricked you into watching 2 movies about this. Now again, there is an additional component. They have the person who kills him at the end is very transparently the entire film being coded as your final act, end of the movie guy who kills the Joker guy, who I think everyone saw about 1 million miles away, with the long fetishistic close-ups lingering on a character who has no lines and has nothing else, with his pointy eyebrows and everything, and he stabs the Joker to death in a hallway at the end, and then he slices his cheeks, implying that he, in fact, is going to go on to become the Joker, possibly the Heath Ledger Joker, at least in spirit, and maybe he's going to go on and fuck Lady Gaga and all of these other things. And by the way, we're talking about the embarrassment of riches version of the movie and all of that. Just the idea that maybe he will live the fantasy of a real, genuine musical with Lady Gaga, but we won't do that with Arthur Fleck, and ha-ha on all of you for projecting these ideas.
Couldn't we have just skipped this movie and seen that one? That one looks more interesting.
It does seem, but here's the thing. That ending, as a sick joke, again, works as a subversion if you first seduce the audience with lots of romance, or you seduce them into Arthur's fantasy, or you seduce them into any kind of experience that actually brings you into a world that has any kind of dynamic contrast with the tone of that revelation. What is the tone of that revelation? Well, that Arthur is kind of beyond the delusions, Arthur is actually unexceptional and small and nothing and insignificant, and his actions only went on to inspire the actions of the Joker, etc. And also, by the way, psychology exists, or something like that. Okay, cool, great. That would have had an impact if we had indulged in a film. Think of a film like Brazil that allows you to indulge in a fantasy of catharsis and then rips that catharsis away from you. But when you don't allow the audience to indulge in a fantasy of catharsis even for a moment, in the musical or in them going on a crime spree, but then he ultimately gets arrested, doesn't get away, doesn't become a crime lord.
Even if he doesn't get away, you have the catharsis, even if only in fantasy, of taking revenge on the guards, making the asylum go crazy, to burning the asylum down, whatever. Don't leave the asylum. Have him go full-on Joker at the asylum. Do that.
Yeah. Anything at all that actually builds energy and emotional momentum behind him. Again, and if you really want to commit to the idea that he's just Arthur Fleck the whole time, and he never has any, and again, this is important, he never commits a single act of violence in the entire film that is not in a dream. So if you want to commit to that idea, for this ridiculous fucking movie, fine. Then you have just put yourself in a position where, since we're not gonna generate any energy through, and that we're gonna strip away from the audience through him leading a revolution against the guards. We're not gonna generate any energy that we're then gonna pull the rug out from under the audience by having him fall in love with Harley Quinn and then break out and go on a Bonnie and Clyde like crime spree, even if it's only once, only to have him tragically betrayed by her and then dragged back to the asylum at the end, which would be a better ending. If you're not going to do that, fine. You have just put yourself in the position of having to make a really good fucking musical where, like, you have Chicago-style set pieces that are so seductive, they make you invest emotionally in the fantasy world more so than the world that exists in the movie. But unfortunately, whether it's because you have a weird, frustrating, and uncooperative lead actor who is increasingly, it's becoming clear, a problem in Hollywood, and he's disappearing off sets and doing all kinds of stuff, who's maybe just not being cooperative, or you just don't have the facility, the director of Old School apparently just doesn't have it in him to direct Busby Berkeley musicals, so you have nothing. You have no movie. You have just what is categorically a non-functional movie experience. You have the absence of a movie against which, you're thinking about what you want to do tomorrow at the grocery store while it's playing. Therefore, just circling back to the ending again, when you get to that ending at the end, the audience is not betrayed or thrown for a loop or sent into a tizzy as they are at the end of Fight Club or The Sixth Sense or Usual Suspects, because all three of those movies fully invested in the fantasy of Bruce Willis is alive and he is going to get back together with his wife. If the film had fucked off and let you see he was a ghost, then that would not have worked. The same thing with Fight Club. It fully allows you to indulge in the power, sexy, whatever power fantasy of Tyler Durden over the course of the whole movie. So when that is taken away, that feels like an actual energetic betrayal. It's a reversal. It's subversive. It's interesting. What was the other one I mentioned? Usual Suspects. Usual Suspects implies that the entire film up to the end is literally a lie and didn't happen. And keep in mind, there is no Kaiser Soze. No one gives a shit who Kaiser Soze is. The only reason we think Kaiser Soze is something cool is because of the emotional reaction we have to the extreme energetic reversal of that moment in the movie. Because we invest so heavily in the crime movie and the reality of that up to that point where Kevin Spacey is the weird gimpy guy, that when that is revealed to be not something or not what it is, then that actually has an impact. It pierces the veil. It throws us for a loop. We actually just watched The Wailing last night, which is a really cool, because it's October, a really awesome Korean horror movie you should check out. October, spooky season. But when you condescend to... If Usual Suspects had condescended to the idea of making a good crime movie, and that would have been the only reason not to do it, if it were instead Francois Truffaut's Usual Suspect and he lacked the facility to actually pull off the crime movie, like his movies like Shoot the Piano Player, that preceded the actual fucking twist at the end, then no one would have remembered The Usual Suspects. If you lack the facility to make Tyler Durden appealing or sexy at all in Fight Club, then no one gives a shit that he's a fucking figment of your imagination. And if you lack the will, facility, or anything to actually make the musical, and you condescend to the very idea of making a satisfying Harley Quinn, Joker, Bonnie and Clyde movie, but only to have Harley betray him and we realize that she was an undercover cop the whole time, or a doctor, or in fact he never actually left the thing and she's just a doctor who works there, and it's a fucking American Horror Story style fantasy where she was a nurse the whole time, and this is an entire fantasy, but you portray the fantasy through such lavish fantasy sequences, including them doing the crime, which you assume is real because the musical sequences are fake, but then the reveal at the end of the movie is that not only are the musical sequences fake, but that his entire going out and, robbing Gotham Bank or whatever with the girl is in fact also fake too. Then you've at least created some energy. You've Usual Suspects did a little bit, you've done whatever. But when you condescend to the idea of doing that at all, then no energy is created, and you just have, you have the production of a movie but without the soul of a movie there in the to exist. So you're just showing an audience dailies at that point. And very much the experience of being in that theater was like the experience of sitting and watching. Cliff and I have been in many editing rooms watching documentary or narrative dailies running by silently and without any emotional investment in the images that are happening. It doesn't matter how evocative or well lit the images are, there's nothing going on behind them. There is no soul, there is no there. There is no spirit in the machine, and there is no there in this movie, and there's no there created in the audience. So at the end, it's just an absence of a movie. And again, it's funny. Todd Phillips began his career doing documentaries about, like a documentary about a punk rock guy named G.G. Allen, who used to like take shits on stage and, like shove bananas up his ass and all that kind of stuff. And this film brings it all home for Todd Phillips, because this feels like someone taking a big shit on the stage and shoving a banana up their ass, and then dying of a heroin overdose before the film was released, as G.G. Allen did. And in that way, it perhaps speaks to a deeper why about the film, and that no one likes G.G. Allen, and no one likes documentary films made about G.G. Allen. Therefore, the only way Todd Phillips's whole thing exists is sort of in a weird, that sort of ironic distancing condescension to his very subject that is so beloved by film majors and the intelligentsia and people who went to college and like going to indie theaters and stuff like that. And so perhaps condescension to the very subject matter that is at hand has actually characterized all of his work, which would account for the fact that the majority of his films up to creating the Joker are little more than good cinematography against which Zach Galifianakis or Robert Downey Jr. or Jonah Hill, in the case of War Dogs, everyone remember War Dogs, are expected to sort of improvise life and chaos and spirit into a film that doesn't otherwise have it. And as we learned from War Dogs and Due Date and The Hangovers 3 and 2 and 1 to an extent, that is not enough. And as Ridley Scott recently learned on Napoleon, you can't just rely on your actors to fill in all of the meaning and subtext for your movies for you. But it worked with Joker. And so now what you're seeing is him returning to his hangover skill set. This really is the hangover to the Joker in more ways than one. Ha 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 ha, because it gives you a headache. Get it? Hangover?
Ha 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 ha. Makes you dehydrated.
Yes, in that it feels like the same production elements, not unlike Hangover 2, vaguely and shabbily assembled in front of the camera to improvise their way somehow towards the end of enough footage to be cobbled together into a 2-hour feature. And if you all remember how tautly structured and paced and executed every moment of Hangover 2 and 3 were, you will get some sense of the depth and precision of execution of Joker, Fully Dumb, or whatever the fuck it's called.
Folie à Deux.
But we can only speculate as to the meanings of this. By the way, we skipped it at the beginning because we ran right through it, but this film was released on October 4th, making it a Libra film, which isn't that interesting because it is a film about a codependent pair of people who get crazy together, which is a very, codependence being a very Libra quality. I know, being a Libra myself. Which, again, like anything else that works about the movie, could only exist if, in fact, it were a complete accident and unknown to the filmmakers at the time. But it is interesting to think about it in that way. But I say that to merely segue into this. Prior to this film, we may be wrong about the Joker. We don't know. There's only one person who can answer definitively the meaning hidden from our sight in the Joker, and that is, of course, God. And so we will consult the spirit world right now, as Taylor will draw. I did a tarot draw prior to this, and we will draw one tarot card as our conclusion, and we will... I don't know what this card is, ladies and gentlemen. I have no idea what it is. No one does. And we will see what the spirits have to tell us about Joker, Folie À Deux, Taylor. It is the Six of Swords, and as you see the Six of Swords, Cliff, hold that up to the camera there. Six of Swords implies a journey. The sword, of course, is the suit of the mind, the suit of air. And it has 3 people in a boat leaving. And this is what you should do instead of seeing Joker Folie À Deux. You should leave in a tiny, tiny boat towards, and we see in the background here, greener pastures, and there will be other movies like A Fish Called Wanda, and as you can see, they're leaving in a boat. What are they going to do in this boat with all these swords? They're going fishing in the boat. That is why you should all skip the Joker fully dumb and see A Fish Called Wanda, which we would have talked about this week, but we didn't, and that is a really good movie, and John Cleese is in it. Now, Cliff, the other thing that we need to do is give away our award for the day. As we will do in every episode, we will give away the Full Metal Jacked Award, which is the award to the most jacked character in the movie. But here's my thought. Because this is an anti-jacked film.
True.
And if you look, really, he's utterly bereft of mass is Joaquin Phoenix.
I do have to give, the Full Metal Jacked Award should go to Joaquin Phoenix for being the most punk rock anti-jacked person there could possibly be.
Here's my thought, is that because we have not given due time to the masterpiece that is Fish Called Wanda, I think really the Full Metal Jacked Award should go to either John Cleese or Kevin Kline, as I think, unfortunately, it cannot go to anyone in Joker 2, just as a matter of principle.
Not. So, well, that's an easy one.
But let's just talk about it. You say it's an easy one, but Kevin Kline gives one of the most dynamic and physical comedic performances. He won the Academy Award. If you have not seen Kevin Kline in A Fish Called Wanda, he is cartwheeling. He literally jumps up, grabs a pull-up bar, does an L-sit split, drops around Jamie Lee Curtis on a bed. It's almost as dynamic physically of a performance as like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly, or just one of those fucking performances that makes you want to move. He holds a sword, all these things. But John Cleese strips down to his underwear in the movie, and he has surprising upper peck mass.
Some would say.
Shocking upper peck
mass.
Well,
I would say even more surprising, yes. I would say as far as the physical dynamism of his performance, no one could possibly beat Kevin Kline, famously so on this. But definitely the most shockingly jacked person was John Cleese, because you would picture John Cleese right now. And now, not having pictured Fish Called Wanda, picture him without his clothes on. What do you imagine? You imagine jowls upon jowls all over his body.
His chest has jowls, his stomach has jowls, his balls have jowls.
Yes, nothing but a mass of jiggling jowls everywhere, from every corner.
He's mostly scrotum, is the idea. Yes, exactly. You would expect him to be mostly scrotum.
But John Cleese in his 50s in this movie, maybe early 50s.
Fully a silver fox.
Silver fox.
Salt and pepper hair.
No extra body fat, no jiggling. He's very fit, clearly works out a lot. And yes, is definitely the most naked person in the film. So there you got to give him that.
I'd say that
multi-accented,
multiple
languages.
He speaks several languages in the film. Instead of just saying macaroni, fettuccine, Mussolini,
yes,
like
that
Kevin
was
Kline.
A great gag, by the way. That was really fun.
And
I've known men like that.
Yes,
that would just.
Oh yeah.
Oh
yeah. No. But no, I will say this: that you get the sense that John Cleese knew he had a nude scene coming up.
He worked out real hard for that one nude scene.
And that he, because he is like, is John Cleese walking around with that kind of fullness in his upper pecs, or did he just do 50 push-ups 10 seconds before walking out there? He just did. He has full delts. He has full traps. He is just very full in the chest, and you know that he fucking did 200 push-ups. Probably not 200. Probably more like 20 immediately before the camera.
Well, let's put it this way: John Cleese wrote the movie,
exactly.
So he would not have written himself to be dancing around naked on the screen. Were he not confident in his ability to present himself well under such circumstances. So he set the stage for himself well, and he pulled it off.
Yes, no, for sure.
Congratulations. First Full Metal Jacked Award goes to John Cleese in Full Metal in Fish Called Wanda.
In A Fish Called Wanda.
In Full Metal Jacket as well. There you can
go.
see him dancing in the background.
All right. Well, with that, I have no idea how long we've been recording. It's either been 30 minutes or 3 hours. It's been some amount of time, but it feels podcasty intuitively. It feels like a podcasty amount of length. So maybe that note, we should end it on a positive note. Go ahead.
One more quick thing. I'll add, just to put the Full Metal Jacket award onto Joker 2, I will give permanently, for the rest of the podcast, I will give Joaquin Phoenix in Joker 2 the last place award for Full Metal Jacket,
Yes.
perpetually, in perpetuity into the future.
Good call.
Because I cannot imagine a person less jacked ever appearing on screen in a movie.
This is true. No one could possibly have less mass than his like concave trapezius skeletal back muscles that
Which
we
we
see in that
spend
movie.
a good 45 seconds on at the beginning of the movie just to really hammer
Yes.
it in how bony that man was.
Yes, in the
Which,
same-
congratulations for dropping the weight. That's something, I guess.
Yes.
But, like, wow.
Yeah, in the same way that Todd Phillips mistook Joaquin Phoenix fucking around a bunch on set for meaning or subtext, Joaquin Phoenix seems to be part of that group of people who mistakes losing a bunch of weight for acting. So anyway, that's enough. We've all seen you get skinny in movies. Get jacked. It's harder.
Bigger.
Get bigger. You know what we haven't seen yet? A super fucking ripped Joker. That's what I'm talking about.
Give me
Jacked Joker. Jackter.
Jackter. Jacked and better than
Jocker.
before.
I don't know. Fuck it. Anyway. All right. So with that, well, hey guys, this was a pretty fun, possibly inaugural episode of the Crowded Theater. So for the Crowded Theater, I'm Kyle.
I'm Taylor.
And I'm Cliff.
Excelsior.
Once